Hi everyone, welcome. Welcome to our lecture on the Hollywood musical, as well as more specifically to the film Singing in the Rain. For those of you who have seen it, and I'm sure there's probably quite a few of you, you all know what an extraordinarily joyous and wonderful experience to watch this for the first or fifth or 15th time. I know personally here at home, my son likes to watch this film from time to time, and I'm so delighted that this is one of the films that he wants to watch again and again. So let's just jump straight in. I'm going to introduce the musical first as a genre, as a distinctly American, Hollywood-born genre, and then we'll talk about the film. This will be a relatively short lecture just because this film is frankly not that deep, if you understand what I'm saying. There's not that much to analyze in terms of film language. So I'm kind of happy in this module to give you a bit of a break, to watch something that doesn't require tremendous critical thinking. Let's just jump straight in. And the musical can be seen as one of the most enduring and popular film genres in film history. And what I want to do today is introduce you to some of the ideas. There are quite a few ideas in the musical. And I also want to introduce you here a little bit to the history of the musical. So the first thing to say is that the musical is a distinctive, unique American form. The musical and one other genre were invented or created by Hollywood. The musical is one of Hollywood's two distinctive contributions to film. Then what is the other uniquely American contribution? It would be the Western. The Western was invented in this country, and it was developed and really perfected probably by John Ford here in the United States. The musical during the studio era, which roughly ran from about 1927 to 1947. These 20 years, roughly, broadly speaking, really represent the peak of the output and the quality of the films that were made in Hollywood. During this time, as you can see here in the numbers, one of the major types of films that were being made is the musical. 919 musical films were produced. Over this 20-year period, you're looking at almost 1,000 musicals, which, if you break it down, works out to approximately one musical almost every single week for 20 years. One Hollywood musical, which means that it was a big budget film. So if we look at the numbers, we can see that this is certainly the peak. It is one of the most important types of films, one of the most important genres of the golden age of Hollywood, Hollywood's golden age. What is the musical? Well, let's define it. We can define it simply. It's when music and dance are combined with drama. Do we make musicals for the drama? Is that why we make the musical? No. What's more important for the musical? The music and dance or the drama? Right, the music and dance. The drama is secondary. You don't go to a musical to watch the drama. The story-based elements are secondary, and they are even pretexts for the production numbers. The movie is an excuse to showcase the song and dance. And in order to make it more palatable to an audience, they added stories. Really, what the movies in the early days were was an inexpensive form of entertainment. Instead of going to the theater or the ballet or the opera, which you couldn't afford, and even today you want a ticket to one of those, you're going to end up paying, $50 at least for a ticket, and that's not even for a good seat. But why not take all of this popular kind of entertainment and put it on film? And if you can put musical stars on film, you can have them singing, you can have them dancing for a mass audience. Now all we need is something to string them along, something to keep them interested, and that's the story. So what's the key takeaway here? The musical exists to display the song and dance. So in the 10 years after really the studio era and the beginning of television, we're talking about the tail end of a period here where Hollywood is already in decline. In the 10 years following the golden age of Hollywood, musicals declined to about half their former numbers. And then again, in the next 20 years after that, the decline continued. And nowadays, we're down to one, presumably, or two, like bona fide musicals per year. Why? The question here is, why did the musical eventually decline? Musicals are, by definition, usually pretty optimistic. Okay. By the end of World War II, with the revelations of the Holocaust, where American service members liberating Germany from the Nazis discovered these concentration camps, they suffered from PTSD. The world discovered the horrors and traumas, not only, of course, of the Holocaust, which was awful in and of itself, but suffered the loss of brothers and fathers and sons, lots of civilians, so we're talking daughters and sisters and mothers as well, hundreds and thousands of civilians. The immediate post-war period was not a very optimistic time. Film noir really reflects that kind of jaundiced point of view, that dark look at the world, like you lift up the rug and you see all of the horrors that humans are capable of at our worst. So after World War II, with millions of people dead, the United States was on the rebound economically, but the exuberance and optimism that existed before the war was declining. And there was a rise in skepticism, a lack of trust and belief in leaders, lack of trust in institutions, right? Whether they're religious or educational or civic. At this time as well, the studio system was in decline in general. People just didn't feel like they were not in the mood. Who wants to go see a musical? And you might be thinking, well, it'll help you get out of that mood. That's entirely possible. I mean, of course, musicals still continued to be released, but they weren't as dominant as they once were. People preferred to see things that reflected how they felt, which was why film noir really took off in the post-war period. So the studio system itself was declining. It was losing sales. Decline in millions of weekly captive audience members. Television, the rise of television. Decline of film as a central means of storytelling. From around the 1920s to the early 50s, the principal way that people got their stories about life, the way we connected with each other as a nation, was through film. Well, that is declining. Now there's competition. There's competition from foreign films, and there's competition from television. So now movies are no longer central. The values of the musical itself typically is optimism. When you watch a musical, a lot of it has to do with just pure happiness and joy. It's very hard to watch a great musical and not have a smile on your face. Reluctance to engage directly in social and political questions. So the musical opts out. It kind of inoculates itself from these larger, directly social and political questions. In contrast to what? Think for a moment about Sweet Smell of Success, how directly political and social it was. What a commentary it was making on ambition, on the political system, on political opportunism. Musicals don't do that. If they do it very gently, and they do it in a very subtle way. The musical itself is by definition anti-realist. Okay. Have you ever seen someone maybe walking down the street whistling to themselves? Right? Don't you, if you're with a friend, you'll like look at him and you'll go, look at that guy over there. He's like whistling to himself. Okay. Now let's go a step further. Imagine that person singing to themselves out loud without headphones. And now imagine them skipping and dancing down the street as they sing about their life. Okay, what would you do? You'd call 911, right? You'd be like, there's a crazy man running down the street, singing at the top of his lungs, and he's talking about, singing in the rain, and he's in love, and he's twirling on lampposts. So we know when we watch movies that it's not realistic. People don't just break out into song in the middle of the day, right? You don't look out your window and go, honey, it's the neighbor again. He's singing in his yard, right? That just doesn't happen. We think people are a little bit batty when they do that. Inherently, the musical is also anti-narrative because music stops the story. Okay, if I'm telling you a story and then I stop and I sing you a song, you're like, wait, you interrupted the story. So almost by definition, music and dance don't tell a story. Now, what we're going to discover very shortly is that changes thanks to Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, and that change is epitomized where we combine the narrative with the music in Singing in the Rain. So we're combining those two things. What is the musical as well? What is the purpose of a musical? It is to celebrate life. Singing in the Rain is really a celebration. And it sounds so corny, doesn't it? Well, it's not a corny movie. I promise you that. Celebration of life, of romance, of desire. Romantic desires, our longing for connection, our longing for romance, our longing for companionship and love. All of that hunger, that passion that we have as a species, as human beings, that is celebrated, and there's no shame in it. And when you take a moving picture of somebody dancing and you combine it with sound, like in perhaps the very best type of music video, there is something intoxicating, poetic, magical, and incredibly compelling when you watch it. Okay, think about your favorite music video. It's amazing, isn't it? Let's just recap here. These first two slides really are talking about the musical. So we've talked about the genre itself. We've defined it. We've looked at the numbers to see how it's declined over the years. We've discussed why it's declined, and we've also discussed what its purpose is, why it exists, and what makes it so captivating and enticing. We're going to take a look now at Singing in the Rain. And Singing in the Rain is really a capstone to the MGM musical. MGM was one of the most famous studios specifically for creating these very lavish productions, highest quality films. They spent as much as they needed to spend on these films. And MGM really pioneered this idea of what's called the integrated musical. Now, we're not talking about racial integration here. It would be great if they had been racially integrated, but it's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about here at the integrated musical is integrating song and dance with story. Singing in the Rain is a culminating studio era, studio system, or golden age of Hollywood type of musical. Culminating means it is the high point of the MGM musical. Here are some of the reasons why. One is, it is a coherent integration of production numbers. A production number basically is a song combined with a dance. So it's a number, a musical number. You combine the musical number with a story, and you have yourself an integrated musical. In an integrated musical, this is key. The characters express their most intense emotions through song. The story is chugging along. And then when we really want to highlight how a character feels, then that character reveals it through music and dance. The dance numbers are symbolic expressions of feelings and ideas. Nowadays, we see the musical as so much more powerful when we use music and dance combined with the story, and then we pause the story so that this character can tell us how they feel. And this is really exemplified in Singing in the Rain. You will notice at every turn that Gene Kelly will share with us how he feels. Now, sometimes he feels really silly, and that's fine, but sometimes he'll confess his deep love or affection, or sometimes his joy, as in the title song, Singing in the Rain. What I want to do is I want to pause here, and I want to let you watch a clip from the film Top Hat. That clip is right below this video. But I'm going to just set it up for you so that you know what you're going to watch. Because the integrated musical, as I just mentioned, it really was pioneered by Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. First of all, just separate from the integrated musical, I want to point out that notice the camera work. The dancing that Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers do in this clip from Top Hat is head to toe. We don't get close-ups of their toes. We don't get close-ups of their upper bodies or their lower bodies. Their bodies are not cut in half or quarters when they're dancing. It's full body. That way we can enjoy their entire performance. That's a Fred Astaire innovation. He insisted, you see his whole body, and that is very wonderful, and we'll see that play out in our film Singing in the Rain. This clip from Top Hat, which is one of my favorite musicals, and it's set in London. two Americans. Fred Astaire is there, and he is a song and dance man, actually. And Ginger Rogers is a fashion model. Long story short, they meet and he falls in love. But of course, she's not interested. The clip that you're going to see begins the next morning when she's coming out to go for a ride on her horse. And he's following her. The musical number that happens towards the end of this clip, this is where Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers kind of get to know each other for the first time. Now, why is the song important? Why is the number, the musical number, important? Because it represents their first dance. And it also represents their song. Because later in the movie, this will always be their song. Anytime they're together, we hear "Isn't It a Lovely Day" in the background, which reminds us that this song was how they met. It's how they danced for the first time. It's where he fell even more in love with her, and she kind of even falls for him. Now, there are complications immediately following this, but at this point in the film, the musical number is not just a musical number. It is two people falling in love. And on that note, I will let you go ahead and watch that clip. It's a short clip. Enjoy it. I apologize for the quality of the clip. It's the best that I could find. And then we have just a few more slides to talk about on the other side of that clip. So go ahead and watch the clip from Top Hat, and I'll meet you in part 2 of the lecture. We are back. I hope you enjoyed that. It's one of my favorite songs. It's one of my favorite sequences. If you notice that very brief handshake, because it almost instantly fades to black right at the end of the song, that really represents their recognition that they really respect each other as performers. And then also, in the story, they shake hands because each character is acknowledging that the other is a great dancer. So they are acknowledging each other as equals. That's what I love about that handshake. Not to mention, the dance itself is marvelous. The way she mimics him, she mirrors him. Anything you can do, I can do better, right? If he does this, she instantly kind of copies him in real time. It's just a wonderful number. That clip from Top Hat in 1935 is setting us up for Singing in the Rain in 1952. Why? Because just as in Top Hat, Astaire and Rogers pioneered the idea of the integrated musical. The number, the musical number, is part of the story. That's very much the case in Singing in the Rain. Now, Singing in the Rain was made by a producer named Arthur Freed, and he led this unit called the Freed Unit, and they didn't just make Singing in the Rain. I mean, you can see here that some of the most famous, most celebrated, and most beloved musicals of all time were made by Arthur Freed. So Wizard of Oz, Meet Me in St. Louis, and An American in Paris, which also stars Gene Kelly. All 4 of these films were made by MGM's Freed Unit. I want to remind you that I will not be posting a post-film analysis. So we're just going to talk about the film now, so you won't have to come back after you watch it. You can watch it and enjoy the film and move on to the context videos. So Singing in the Rain, what are some important things to understand about this film? With no spoilers. The film was made in the early 50s, but it is set in the 20s. It's set actually very specifically in 1927. It would be like if we made a film today about, say, the mid-90s. In the same way, Singing in the Rain is a period film. It is not set in the 50s. It is set in the 20s, in the flapper period, 2 years before the Great Depression, and crucially, in 1927, when what happened in 1927? The talkies were created. In other words, the technology came around in 1927, not merely to record, which already existed, but to sync, to perfectly sync the sound of someone's voice to their lips moving. What is the film really about? It's about movies in the 20s and the transition in movies from the silent era to the talkies. So Singing in the Rain is really about the history of movies. It's a great, fun story. You don't even realize you're kind of being told a story about movie history. You really are watching a movie being made. That's the first thing we discover, right? A movie is going to be made, and that movie is a silent movie. The movie is stopped. It is now going to turn into a talkie. And then, without giving any spoilers, that changes again. And I won't tell you how or why, but you can probably imagine. The story of Singing in the Rain is really about performance. It's about performing in movies for an audience. It is about the musical itself. Singing in the Rain, you'll see in the film as you watch it, charts and chronicles the birth and development of burlesque to vaudeville, to Broadway, to Hollywood. So there is a sense of progression both in the character in the film as he moves his way from burlesque to vaudeville to Broadway to Hollywood, as well as the music that we hear and the musical numbers that we see all reflect this kind of development. So we see the musical history of Hollywood come to life in this film. The film also incorporates elements that are not necessarily from the 1920s. Jazz certainly was a certain kind of jazz, but modern dance is something that this film uses that is more of the era of the 1950s. So it really covers a very wide, broad span of music and musical styles. The film serves as a song catalog, an encyclopedia or an archive of musical history, musicals, and films in general. The film is also a romantic melodrama. The genre of the film within the film is the swashbuckler, Errol Flynn adventure type of film. The film itself does have a formal exuberance. In other words, the way that it was made, the language of the camera, the choreography, the colors, the sets, the way that it is made, the language that it speaks visually is itself exuberant. This film does have that kind of formal exuberance, and it is always in touch with film history and musical history. So yes, we can just view it for what it is, the way, my son might watch this film is just for pure enjoyment, and that's perfectly okay. But also be aware that when you're watching all of these musical numbers, they are chronicling a history of the film industry and the musical itself. The structure that this film uses is self-aware and self-reflexive. That means this movie is talking in some ways about its own development. Okay, it's part of this tradition, but it's the product of this tradition, and it shows you the tradition as it builds up. But at the same time, it's also a film that contains all of the films that came before it, and they pay homage to that tradition and to that history. What I'd like to look at now are some themes. Most musicals will have one, perhaps two of the themes. One of the things that makes Singing in the Rain so extraordinary is that to some degree or another, it contains all four of these themes. The first one is show business. The film is about putting on a show. It is a behind-the-scenes look at a Broadway show, at a musical, dance company. They are about performance, show business. And they're about the politics, the relationships. They're about the backstage stories, behind-the-scenes look at putting on a show. So all of the drama that goes into show business. Theme number 2 is social class or position versus talent and merit. And these kinds of films you'll recognize as, for example, the poor orphan girl who wants to be a dancer. And so she escapes from the orphanage. She has no money. And she gets to the big city. And through lots of pluck and courage and determination, she gets a scholarship to study at a school, and she works her way up to become the prima ballerina. But who is her biggest antagonist? Who is her biggest enemy? The privileged rich girl, the spoiled rich girl who has had everything handed to her on a silver platter, who has tutors and teachers and her mother ferociously defending her, and lots of money defending her position through her social class. On whose side are we usually on? On the side of talent and merit. Somebody who works hard and earns their way to success and fame and riches. Well, the same thing with musicals. You'll notice in Singing in the Rain, for example, that there is a character who represents the talent and merit, and that is Debbie Reynolds' character. And then we have a character, Gene Hagen's character, whose name is Lena Lamont, who is the spoiled, privileged woman who doesn't deserve all the success that she has. And these movies take the side of talent and merit. Now, implicitly, this is a political, socioeconomic subject matter, but most musicals are not too heavy-handed about it. They reflect this kind of tension between social hierarchy, right? The rich, the 1%, the wealthy, the upper class, the upper middle class, versus the middle class, the lower middle class, the poor, the abject, the people who have nobody on their side, but who have determination and grit and talent and skill and drive. And so movies like Singing in the Rain in this respect really always take the side of talent and merit. We're looking here at high culture versus popular culture. Now you'll remember I described high culture as the opera, the theater, the symphony. Expensive culture, culture that is expensive to make and expensive to partake and enjoy. Popular culture are the movies, the radio, music in general that is pop music. Pop music comes from the term popular because it has the widest following amongst us, the people, the masses. To a lesser degree, but still true in Singing in the Rain, most of the time these musicals will take the side of popular culture against high culture, and they make fun of the hoity-toities. They make fun of the pretentious. And you'll notice as an example in the wonderfully fun number called Moses Supposes, Gene Kelly makes fun of his speech coach, who is very proper and tries to get him to enunciate, "Moses supposes his toes are roses." They turn him into a clown. So it's lighthearted ribbing, but it is definitely a sense of anti-pretentiousness. And as I mentioned, Hollywood will usually take the side of the popular culture. Against what? Against the older forms of culture, like opera. There's a clip I will share with you from a night at the opera in which the Marx Brothers basically tear apart the opera and make a mockery of it. I will upload that clip for you so you can watch it on the optional videos page. And you'll see how the Marx Brothers treat the opera with complete disdain as well as pure mockery. Okay, so they're really offending the sensibilities of these wealthy, educated, cultured people. The last theme that is prevalent in many musicals, and especially in ours, is convention and restraint. Okay? Convention is what is normally done by most people, and restraint is holding back. There are certain rules that we all follow, and that's the rules of society, and that's called convention and restraint. As I said in the beginning of the lecture, you walk down the street, no matter how happy you are, if you're an adult, you don't start skipping and singing, right? You hold it together. And that's convention and that's restraint. Whereas in musicals, this genre gives life and lease to the idea that if you feel something, you should express it. How? Be spontaneous. Allow your energy to come out. Allow your natural self, your natural talent to come out. So on the one hand, we have what is dictated, handed down, and expected. That's called the conventional. Whatever everybody agrees is the right way to behave, versus your own personal sense of joy and desire. And in this film, Gene Kelly and Debbie Reynolds and Donald O'Connor all allow their spontaneity, their natural talent, skill, and their energy just to explode, and we share that joy with them. So let's wrap it up by taking a look here at how Singing in the Rain does encompass all of these themes. There's the show business aspect. There is the social class versus talent merit and making fun of high art aspect, and And there's also the convention and restraint versus the spontaneity and energy. How do we see that? Well, there are so many seemingly improvised dance numbers where Gene Kelly or Donald O'Connor will just suddenly break out into song and dance. They just use whatever is around them in the room or on the studio set. They turn those things into props. And they might take a space over and turn it into a dance space. So what they are actually doing in this film is enacting a form of freedom. It can be social and artistic. It can be musical, and it can be dance-based. It can be personal. And that's one of the reasons I think everybody really loves this film. A final point about one of the themes that is prevalent in this film is appearance versus reality. What things seem aren't always what they are. We hear somebody singing, we assume that that singer is the one whose voice we're hearing. But it's not. And time again in this film, there are things that we think are one way and they are actually not that way. Gene Kelly, in his role as Don Lockwood from the very beginning of the film, he pretends to be someone that he's not. Even though he's this great Hollywood silent star in the movie, he plays a silent star, he pretends to be someone who was raised and cultured in a upper middle class background, then he went to conservatories, when in fact he worked his way up the way the rest of us do. As a final note, I want to just remind you that when you're watching the film, keep your eye on the camera. Look at the cinematography. Notice how not only do we see the dancers in full body, but there's also almost like a dance between the camera and the dancers. So many times the camera just allows us to see the dancers, but other times on certain cuts and in certain tracking shots, the camera is also very much part of this dynamism. On that note, go forth and enjoy the film and then move on with the rest of the module. Bye-bye.